Okay, welcome back. If you are back, if you didn't come to this morning, well, welcome. This session is about content-aware tools in Photoshop CS5, and it's also going to be about calculations. I'm determined to fit that in. Mr. Young, Mark Young, earlier on today, made a bit of a mistake when he came and said 5 more minutes. In fact, there were 20 more minutes. So I'm determined to make that. But in response, actually, I've also got an animated GIF featuring Mr. Young, which is one of the ways I get my own back on people. Anyway, hopefully we'll have time for that as well. Maybe I should just show you that to start off. That's actually coming up in the next session, but do you know Mark Young? He's around, you'll see him around today. He's one of the owners of Academy class. So I wanted to demonstrate a feature that's one of the content-aware features called Puppet Warp. And one of the things you can do with Puppet Warp is end up making an animation of somebody. You can warp their limbs and then sort of capture that movement and turn it into an animated GIF, where each layer becomes a frame in an animation. So I spent quite a bit of time doing this with Mark. I'm not sure why, just sort of the heck of it. I don't know if I mentioned he's Scottish. Anyway, this is the... that's nothing to do with it. But this is the animation that I put together, which I actually showed him earlier on. This is Puppet Warp, being able to do that stuff. I didn't really know what to do, so I thought I'd eat his head and then turn him into an elephant. So, yeah, I need a life. Okay. Some of the content-aware tools have been around for a while. And CS4 had content-aware scale in it. Now, if you hadn't seen content-aware scale, it's kind of interesting. It allows you to transform an image without distorting everything. And one of the images that Adobe provided was this. They called it Dynasty Car, nice little car. And in the layers window, you can see that's a 2-layer object. You cannot apply any kind of transform to the background layer. So you've got to convert the background layer to being a regular layer. And that's easy enough to do. You just double-click on it and go, OK, and then it's immediately an ordinary layer. That's one of the ways to do it. But if now I've got layer 0 selected, if I go up to Edit, Content-Aware Scale, that puts what looks exactly like a transform or the old kind of cropping frame around an image. And normally, if I dragged that left-hand slider in, well, I'll just show you with regular transform. If I do just do Command-T and drag the slider, that's an ordinary transform. Everything squishes. With content-aware, you get an instant smart car. I was really intrigued by this. I thought, how on earth, any circular object is automatically protected, which I think is magic. I don't know how they do it. And if they told me, I wouldn't understand. So, But I thought this is fascinating. Of course, then you have to press Enter to apply any transformation, or it doesn't work. If you do a transformation of some kind and you decide partway through, oh no, that's not what I wanted to do, the only way to clear it is either to apply it or delete it. And you delete it by pressing the Escape key, and then it just goes back to the previous image. So I thought this deserved a little checking out to see what else was protected. So here we've got a picture called Surfers. Now that's only one layer. It's not the background layer, so you can run a transform on it. And if I do run a content-aware scale transform on it, you can see that human figures are preserved as well. Surfboards are not, but human figures are. But there is a way of preserving surfboards as well. You make a selection of the areas that you want to protect. and then save that as a channel. So in the channels window here, I've already got one called figures. And if I just command click on that, there's the selection. So let's say I've made this selection, and now I've just saved it as a channel by going into channels and clicking on that icon at the bottom. And the result is, now you don't have the selection active, because if you have a selection active, then whatever you do only applies to the selected area. So if you have the selection active and you try to do a transform, it's really a mistake. So I'll go back into Content Aware Scale. But this time, up on the options bar here, you have a choice to protect a channel. And that's the key. So this is the name channel, figures. That's one that I've saved that selection in. And if I just choose that, and then squish it, the surfboards are protected as well. So you can create a selection to preserve whatever you want while you squish the image. Now this is perhaps not something that you would need to use often, but you might be at a position where you've got a landscape image and you want a portrait version of it, but you don't really want to crop it down. You want to keep all the stuff that's happening in that landscape image and kind of squish it all together in a way that no one's going to notice. So I thought, okay, this definitely deserves looking at more. So I've got another image here called Avebury. Don't know if any of you have ever been to Avebury. It's a very impressive place, especially so as there's a pub right in the middle called the Bull. A very fine pub. Lovely place altogether, fascinating area. And I decided I would run Content Aware on this. But I decided to run some protection, I'd make some selections. So here in the channels window, I've got two channels created. Now this first one is called Rocks and People, and those are the objects that I selected. And the second one is called More People, and it's actually these groups over in the field and this little group with rocks here. So let's just try a Content Aware Scale without any protection whatsoever. So I'm not going to load one of those channels yet. You can see the rocks are starting to squish, but the church is protected. So is a building which could be a pub. It's not, in fact. The pub's over here. That might be the pub. But the rocks are squished. The people are not. The sheep are not. The church is not. That could be, aside from the fact that you've got distorted rocks, you could say, okay, well, I've now got a usable portrait image from the original landscape image. Now, if I load this, say, okay, now I'm going to do Content Aware Scale, but I'm going to protect rocks and people. Now the rocks don't get squished either. If I wanted to protect both those, now if you've got two selections saved as different channels, and you want to load both of them and work with that, you can do that quite quickly and easily. You can also convert both of those channels into one channel that holds all the information. Now the first way, if I want to load this channel as a selection, that's Command click on it. Now if I hold down the Shift key as well and then click on the one below it, then I've got both selections active simultaneously. That's a cool shortcut. If I want to combine the two channels, either into a new channel, into one of the existing channels, I could go up to the Select menu, Load Selection. Actually, let's just load this selection to begin with. Select, Load Selection, let's say I want the channel called More People to be added to this one. Okay. That loads it, doesn't combine the two. If I load one of those channels and then go Save Selection, I can now save this other channel, More People, that one, into the Rocks and People by clicking Add to Channel. And when I click OK, you'll see that little white dot there will appear here. Oops, other way around. So now I've got everything loaded into that one channel. So that's a way of combining them. Now if I now choose More People as the protected channel, then it should be even better, shouldn't it? Oddly enough, the house starts to get squished, and it didn't before, and I don't know why it does now, but I found that's consistent. So the sheep still don't get squished, the people don't, the rocks don't, the church, hey, the church is still protected. I just think this is so cool. You can do some outrageous condensing of, data in images, because, if you saw a picture like that, you think, well, I'm not going to go there, it's too busy. But, yeah. So you can do quite surprising things. So I thought, okay, well, let's take this to a ridiculous extreme, and here's this other crazy, crazy, strange image called beach. That is probably not the best jump that guy in the parachute ever did. Because if you land in the ocean and a parachute comes down on top of you, you're in real trouble. But anyway, so we've got people, we've got an ocean liner, we've got a parachutist. Only the people, as far as I was aware, are objects which will automatically be protected. So this came as quite a surprise. Content-aware scale, nothing gets squished. And now I've got a portrait shot, probably not one that I'd ever want to use, but even the parachutist survived without getting squished. It's quite remarkable. So I'm not quite sure what algorithms they've built into Photoshop to tell it what to protect, but they're very effective. And as I said, this was around in CS4. I think Adobe found this was interesting enough to want to take it much, much further in CS5. So what they added in CS5 takes what already seemed like magic for me and turns it into sort of downright voodoo. So now we're going to have a look at some voodoo. So as well as content-aware scale in CS5, you've also got content-aware heal and content-aware fill. And I'm going to do heal first. You're probably all familiar with the healing brush tool, and you may have used the spot healing brush. The difference between the two is the healing brush tool requires a source point in the same way that the clone source tool requires a source point. You hold down the Alt key, you click on the image, and with the clone stamp tool, that becomes the source of an exact copy, a clone, elsewhere in the image to fix damage. But with the healing brush tool, the source point is purely a reference for the original color and for the original texture. That's it. And then you go paint somewhere and it fills it in. When you let go, it takes the color from the edge of the blob that you painted and fills that area. And it only takes the texture from the source. So it's quite different. So with this one, this is a stock photo from Adobe. Not a very happy cow, probably. And they've adjusted how the spot healing brush tool works. So whereas in CS4, you just use it like the healing brush tool, but it does not require a source point, which sometimes is great, but sometimes doesn't work. And I've generally opted for the source point, because then I have control. Now if you choose spot healing brush, and up here you've got content aware checked, it's quite different. So I'm just going to make that brush a little bit bigger, and we'll get rid of this wire first of all. So you don't need a source point. You just drag across the offending article, and it's still a healing brush tool. You've got to get rid of all the damage. If you leave something behind, the chances are the color of what you left behind will be used to fix the result. Gone. That's it. And yeah, I can take out this one as well. I've even once or twice successfully removed the cow. Now, I mean, I'll give it a try. It probably won't be anything like successful. And you see how it's covering up the legs of the black cow in the background? Sometimes you end up with 12 legs on that cow. There you go. A little bit of damage there I'm not so keen on. Try it again. Perfect. You can also get rid of bird dew on a fence with this very quickly and efficiently. It's an amazing tool. Look, it's putting the wood grain back in. Isn't that cool? So it's a lot quicker than using clone stamp tool. You don't need a source point. You can just go sailing around in the image until it's all fixed. Okay, now I'm going to do something silly. This isn't going to work. It's just not going to work. But I want to see how many legs we're going to end up with. By the way, I don't know if you've gone into any classes where people like me are using one of these Wacom pens. They're great. If you haven't tried one yet, really you should. This one, I've been using these for years. And this one cost me £35. It was in my hands the next day. I got it off eBay, where we all do our shopping, right? The disc that they sent with me was archaic, and my Windows XP couldn't even read it. So I just got online and went to the Wacom site and downloaded the latest drivers and finished. Oh. How many legs we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7 legs. And some interesting wood textures on the field in the background. It looks like the fence is sort of erupting. Spores coming off the fence. Anyway, that was silly, but it's a very cool tool. I'll show you another example of it. The good thing about these tablets is if you use a mouse, one finger does all the work. You know? Now, aside from the fact that a mouse is the world's worst drawing tool, you know, I might as well draw with this as draw with a mouse. If you wanted to design a worse drawing tool, you probably couldn't. They are just unbelievably poor. Whereas a pen, you know, give you an example of the accuracy. Try signing your name with a mouse and then sign your name with a pen. But the biggie to me is that what that's going to do to you, that's going to give you repetitive stress injury one day. The question is when. Quite possibly some people in this room already have it to some degree. I'm always running into people who have this to some degree. I've never heard of anyone getting it from using a pen. I have used the pen on a deadline project where I was putting in 18-hour days for such a long time I got a blister on my finger from tapping on the button here on the nib. If I'd been using a mouse, my arm would have withered and fallen off, you know. So this is a really, really inexpensive way of ensuring that your career doesn't go down the tubes at some point. Because if you get that, it's not going to quit. It's not going to go away. It will hurt more and more and more until you have to make a career choice. That's how bad it gets. So, anyway, here's another one. This is one of the stupidest pictures I ever took, because that guy could have reached through the fence and grabbed me. And I'm never going to do that again. But again, you know, if you want to make a really stupid picture, you want to take that wire right out of it. Now it's a dumb picture. Yeah? Isn't that cool? That would have taken me quite a bit of time with the clone stamp tool. I couldn't have done it with the healing brush tool. 10 seconds. Here's another example. This one, sometimes you have to give it a couple of hits. Here we go. It's a freshly painted horse with a halter attaching it to the wall. So I'm going to zoom in on that and get a nice small brush. And I'm going to try and get rid of this chunk, the red rope, the ring, the shadow, the whole thing. Now, one other advantage, if I was using a mouse here, at some point I would probably run out of mouse pad. And I'd go off the edge of the table or something. With these tablets, you cannot run out of mouse pad. The tablet is your screen. So it's just not possible to run out of, run off the edge of something. When you're using this tool, you've got to cover up all of it. If you leave anything behind, you'll regret it. And I'm also going to run across the doorway here. There. A little bit left here. And the rest of it I could fix with the clone stamp tool with no problem. That's an amazing tool. That's a real time saver. Okay, so that's content away heal. Now, if you thought that was good, content aware fill is downright scary. Here's a cute picture of elephants. Now, if you're a photographer, you'll know that a successful picture does what the photographer wanted to the person looking at it. That's what makes a picture a success. How that success is defined is another thing, but very often you've got a focal point. You want the person's eyes to end up resting on a particular part of the image, as that's what the image is about. So this is an image about a mother elephant and a baby elephant. It is not a picture about bits of elephant in the background. Yeah? So content-aware fill could be used to remove the offending parts of elephants. And if I just use the freehand lasso tool, and I'm going to draw, I'm not going too close to these elephant bits. I'll do them one at a time. I'll just do this one first. Edit, fill, use content-aware. How about that? And this one. If you do them both together, you sometimes run into trouble. Now I can see more clearly on that second one I did that here, where's the mouse? There, that area there is clearly repeated right there. So this is not perfect, and Adobe don't claim that it's perfect. It's just the next best thing to it. You know, you've got to go back in and do a little bit of work, because one of the most visible problems you get with a clone stamp tool is a repeating pattern. And so you've got to prevent that. Well, this tool will sometimes give you a repeating pattern, and you'll have to go in there and fix a little bit here, a little bit there. Over here it did a great job. I mean, it's got that from there, so you know it's got to get it from somewhere. But it just does a very, very, very good job in general. Now, sometimes you're going to get away with it a lot more easily. For example, in this example, which is, I guess this is a photo taken shortly after a boating disaster. I guess. So we've got these two life jackets, and the life jackets create a reflection and a shadow. So you've got to get rid of all of them. So again, I'm just going to draw quite loosely around this one. And then use content-aware fill. I got away with that pretty well. Little bit of work to do, but hardly anything. This is a little more difficult because it overlaps the canoe. And occasionally it just doesn't really work. The idea there is I'm just going to try and not go over that white line if I can. So I've got the, excuse me, the shadow, the reflection, the life jacket. Oops, wrong tool. So that is going to require a second hit, but it got rid of a big chunk of it. Isn't that clever? I couldn't think this stuff up. It's great. You know, Adobe look around for what they can add in the next version, and I'm always trying to think of what are they going to add in the next version. And in CS4, I remember thinking, there's nothing else I want. Does it all? No. So, okay, now here's another, and I think we're definitely going to have time for, for calculations. I just want to show you this one. Here we've got, this is a fairly typical thing that happens to me a lot. I want to take a picture of something and I can't fit it all in the camera. So I end up shooting it in chunks, and that means I've got a panorama to put together. So, and CS5 makes that also really easy. So I'll just go File, Automate, Photo Merge. And cylindrical is the option here on the left that is the best one to pick if you want to have a panoramic image, horizontal panoramic image. That is the best one to pick. Spherical is kind of interesting because you can, one example I saw, there's a guy in the middle of the Albert Hall and takes photos all the way around. So you've got a string of like 18 photos. And you can tie them all together using this method. as a continuous loop. And then you can take a picture of the roof and stick it on top like it's the lid. And then you run this spherical on it, and you've got a 3D environment. Well, not 3D, but spherical, and you can sort of pan around inside the Albert Hall. So I tried it, and it didn't work. Because the method I was using was correct, but I glitched it somehow. What I ended up with was, if you imagine a ball with all your pictures stuck to it, so it looks like your world kind of thing. And that's what I ended up with, and it's great, and I can't duplicate it. So if any of you manage to do that, please contact Academy class and let me know, because I, I want to do it again. Anyway. Cylindrical, then you choose Add Open Files. The files have to be in a saved state when you do this. If you've got other files open, you just select them and say Remove. And then you go, OK. And then you sit back for a minute and keep your fingers tightly crossed. I didn't test this on this computer, so I'm really hoping it works. If it doesn't, that's going to be a real shame. I'm not sure. It's not looking great yet. Well, I should have tested this one earlier, Oscar, shouldn't I? Yeah. Normally you've got a much wider image by now, but it's... Anyone heard any good jokes lately? I collect Bill Gates jokes. I heard one, there's a guy waiting in the VIP lounge in Seattle Airport, and he sees Bill Gates. And he thinks, and he walks over and says, Mr. Gates, you've no idea who I am. It will be such a huge boost to my career if I'm waiting for my biggest client. When he arrives, you could just come tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, Chris, how's it going? The client arrives, and a few minutes later, Bill Gates taps him on the shoulder. Hey, Chris, what's new? And he turns to him and says, piss off, Gates, can't you see I'm in a meeting? Sorry about that. Okay, so this only took 2 of the 3 images, but I'm going to work with that, so I should have checked this out beforehand. So we've got a panorama of 2. It's missing some of this, I think. Yeah, it's missing this stuff over on the left, so we won't bother about that. Let's just pretend it's this big. Now, you can see it's distorted the image. We've got what's called barreling to make it fit, but it's fixed the color along that seam. If I open up the layers window, you can see, oh, we've got the 3rd layer. Interesting. Okay. Strange. These are masks, and the white on a mask means we see that part of the image sharing the layer. The black area on the mask means that part is transparent, which means we can see something else through it. So I've got these 3 layers. Now what I'd like to do is merge them, but keep hold of the transparency around them. If I choose Merge Visible, that's exactly what I get. 1 layer, but I've still hung on to the transparency. If I flattened it, the transparent areas go opaque white. But now they haven't. Now I could say, okay, I want to straighten this out. That horizon's crooked. Now, in Photoshop, there's several ways to do everything. If I use the crop tool here, and I'm going to draw a rectangle like that, this division is called rule of thirds. It's new in CS5, and it's how great Renaissance artists used to design their paintings. If you put this, just draw this crop frame over a picture of Da Vinci's Last Supper, you'll see what I mean. The top of the table lines up with this dotted line. The back ends of the room line up with these 2 lines. All the action happens in this central square. It's just amazing. And you can do it with pretty much any one of those great paintings from the Renaissance era. And also buildings. Incredible. Anyway, that central point, which can be moved anywhere, is the point of rotation around which this frame rotates. If I put it over here, and then rotate the frame to line up the bottom edge with my horizon, then all I have to do is stretch the window out again. And I'm deliberately going slightly outside the frame because I want to have some transparent area left around it when I'm done. So now I've got even more transparency than I had before, but the horizon's level. Now I'm going to use Content Aware Fill to fill in the transparent bits. So first I select them. Now I'm going to extend the selection a tiny bit so that it overlaps existing data. Otherwise, there may be a little bit of a line there. So select, modify, expand 2, 3. Let's move that selection frame in just slightly. And now I can say, edit, content-aware scale, no, edit, fill. What are you doing, Mark? Fill, content-aware fill. Pretty good, isn't it? Now, again, it's not perfect. If I zoom in, especially down here on the water, you can see a division, quite clear. So you have to get in there afterwards and fix things with clone stamp tool, probably ideal. I've tried making the edge of that selection very slightly soft. It doesn't make any difference to this. You still have work to do. So I've decided I'm better off keeping the selection hard, not softening it at all, then running content-aware fill, and then just going and fixing it. But for a lot of that image, even though you can see this division now that I've zoomed in, it's not bad. When you look at it from a distance, hey, then it's great. So it's a very clever process altogether. So that's a look at some of the content-aware stuff. Now I'm going to do calculations. Of course you can. And that's a good question. I didn't actually say. What Photoshop does is it looks for matching data. There's the right-hand edge of one picture and the left-hand edge of another one, and say, okay, these two match. So you don't have to tell it, this one's first, that's second, that's third. But when you take the shots that you're going to turn into a panorama, you have to ensure that there's going to be overlapping data. So if there's a gap, it can't do it.
So you had those 3 files.
Yeah.
So you have obviously you have to be aware of how many files you have open. So
yeah.
Otherwise you have something.
Well, when you say add open files, it'll add all the files that you've got open that are in a saved state. And then you can select the bogus file that doesn't belong and say remove, and just leave the ones that you want to merge. So you do have that option. Sometimes, I mean, my little laptop, which probably has less memory than this thing, has never yet failed on a panoramic merge. And I've done 18 images in a string, and it works. So you have to test out your own computer. I might have been able to add that third image to this combination of the two, but I don't want to spend a whole lot of time doing that. Okay. So this is the stuff that I didn't get to do this morning. Blending modes, calculations. That's the image we're going to use. We're going to lift that girl out of that image and put her into another image, this one. And then, so we're going to then convert the colors. Now, who did that? Then we're going to convert the colors of this image, because it looks like a nice autumn shot of a forest. And the idea is, you know, she's got to have set light to it. We're going to use the color scheme here to change the color scheme here. And then, because the process of lifting her out of this is strange, to say the least, we're going to add her arch co-conspirator and do another extract from this image. This one's kind of easy. This one's kind of difficult. So we'll do the difficult one first. So, as I said, with calculations, you're using one channel, you're offsetting the values of one channel against another, and then saving the result as a third. And calculations is under the image menu, there it is. And the image will update to show you what's happening. Now, this I was intending to use with the blending modes example this morning, because you can use blending modes as a way of offsetting the data in the channels. You can also use a mask from another channel to add to the offset data that you've already got. You can invert one of the masks, one of the channels if you want. This is using red and red. We've got two sources, 1 and 2. Usually you want, for a human figure, for example, red and green are the two channels that you usually want to work with. So if I chose red and green, then that's not a bad place to start. But if I then choose a blending mode here, and you've got all kinds of blending modes, including a couple that you do not have in the layers window. So blending modes pop up here and there in Photoshop. Sometimes you'll find them up here on the options bar. Mostly you'll find them in the layers window. But here we've got blending modes as well. And some of them will do really weird things to your image. So sometimes it's quite hard to know exactly what you want to do with it. Oddly enough, that is what I want to do with this one, but I'm going to change this data down here. Now if I change the offset to -70, then you can see I'm not bothered that it's bleached out part of the face. The only things in this image I'm interested in are the right side and the left side. And because they're so wildly different, I'm just going to focus on them one at a time and then combine the best of two, the best of both, into yet another channel that combines the two of them. So in this one, all I'm looking at is that kind of separation down that side. If I change that offset to -20, you can see it's much lighter, much grayer. If I make it -90, I'm probably losing some detail, and it's the gray and the black are starting to zoom into the hair here. So if I leave that at 7, that's a pretty good sort of middle ground. So that's kind of how this works. So I'm now going to go OK, and in the channels window I've got this new channel, and see, did I want to do? Yeah, I'm going to call that one R+G, red and green. Now I'm going to copy that, drag it onto the new, I call that the new whatever icon because it's new whatever the window happens to be. And this one I'm going to adjust in levels. And of course if I drag that side in, I'm posterizing it, the blacks become blacker. If I drag that side in, the whites become whiter. So I'm going to do a kind of a combination of things here. This one I'm going to drag into 20. It's a little bit of posterization at the shadow end. This one I'm going to change to 235, and this one to 0.6. And that means that I've just cut off this tone at the end, this tone at this end, and I've made the image darker, because if I move the middle slider to the right, more of the data is to its left, which means darker than 50%. Okay? I'm going to OK that. And I'll call that one first level. So that's going to do me for that side. This is kind of like the invention of the bagel. Any of you know how bagels are made? It's a very unlikely series of events. Basically, some guy was making bread once and ended up with a piece of dough left over and thought, well, what can I do with this? I don't want to waste it. I know, I'll boil it. And then I'll bake it. I mean, how likely is that? And that's what they did. Oh, and they made it into a ring with a hole in the middle. And there's a bagel, and that's how bagels are made. So this is kind of like the invention of the bagel. It's a process that you'd never come up with on your own, but somebody did. So I'm going to copy red and green again, and I'll just name this one a second level. Now this one I'm going to try and get hold of the left-hand side of the image, and that's going to require quite a lot more work in the levels window. So I'm going to change this number here. You can either use the slider, or you can just do it by the numbers. 160. And again at the end, 235. And the one in the middle, 1.3. Now I'm cutting off all this data. And the result is, there's only going to be 75 shades of gray left in this channel. Isn't that weird? And down here it looks like I've lost it completely, or I kind of have. So now I'm going to run like sort of a calculations on this using these two, and go image, calculations. Source 1 is going to be my first level adjustment. Sorry, my second. Source 2 is my first level adjustment. And now I'm going to add a mask. Now I had a few channels already made here. This one's soft blob. I'm just going to cancel that a second. I'll show you soft blob. Real sophisticated channel. All this one's designed to do is sit over that part of the image to help out with the definition on that piece of her hair and her knuckle. That's all it's intended to do. The flame is because this process posterizes the image a great deal, and you lose that softness and transparency of the flame. This is just going to sort of put it back later. So now I'll come back to this one. Okay, image, calculations. Source 1 is second level, source 2 is first level, mask, soft blob. Look at that. Now I've got good separation back down that side. It's a very strange method. Now if I say, yep, save that one in a new channel, I've now got a combination called best of 2. Still not finished because I've got to get rid of all this data in her face. And for that I'm just going to use the brush and a big white brush with a hard edge and just paint her out. Oh, that's wrong. Oh, there we go. Don't know why that wasn't working for a second. If you're doing this on a picture of your employer, then you'll probably enjoy this process. And this will get rid of a lot of it. Now the one thing you do not do is go over the edge. If you do, you're completely changing the shape that you're going to end up with. So to get rid of this data now, I'm going to switch to this tool, the Dodge tool. And the Dodge tool is an old darkroom tool. It's a piece of cardboard taped to the end of a pencil. You wiggle it around in the beam as you're making an exposure. And it restricts light to the print and leaves that bit of the print lighter. So the Dodge tool, if I use it on highlights and set the exposure to 50, watch what happens to the hair up here. It gets lighter. The light grays get lighter. Black isn't really affected very much. You can run it here too and get rid of the strap. And here, I run it on her knuckles. Now that tone's pretty dark. And by the time I've got rid of this dark area here, I might be making the background just a little bit lighter. I should have just painted that bit, shouldn't I? So there we go. You can see that the background's getting a little bit light here. So you do the work first with this tool. You kind of do this first, then you switch to shadows, and you hold down the Alt key. And that reverses the use of this tool, and instead of making highlights lighter, it makes shadows darker. I'm going to switch to highlights again and just do a little more work there around the flame. Anyone kind of warm? Can we have the door open? And how do you turn this? Is it easy to turn this thing off? Yeah. Sounds easy. It's very noisy. Right? Oh, this one. Okay. It is noisy, isn't it? Can you still hear me all right? Okay, I'll just try and speak up. Now, that's not bad, but I want to put the flame back in. Now, I've used one blending mode of add earlier on. This one I'm going to use another blending mode. This morning, for those of you who were here, I showed you how to fix a faded image by using multiply. A multiply multiplies up the tone density of each layer to give you a sort of combined density for all the layers that you've got. It's got an opposite, and the opposite is called screen. And if I take this image and this channel, which has a lighter flame, and it doesn't matter whether I have it as source 1 or source 2, it doesn't matter, and use screen as the blending mode, it takes the lightest of both and combines them into a final image. So let's go to calculations again, and I'll call source 1 best of 2, but source 2 is going to be the flame. There it is. and I'm going to use a blending mode of screen. That's it. Just adds the two together. So if you know what the blending modes do, it's much easier then to go ahead and use them. The ones that we used this morning were the biggies: multiply, darken, hue, and color. Those are the four that I find I'm using time after time after time. Add, screen, some of the others, not quite so often. Anyway, now I've got what really counts as a final mask, and if I load that as a selection by going Command-click on it, and then return to my RGB image, so I don't have any channel selected now, I've just got the selection, I can just go Command-C, and go over into the forest image and paste her in. And that's a method that's been around forever in Photoshop, but hardly anyone uses it anymore. It's good, isn't it? It's a really good method. Okay, now we'll change the color of the forest in the background. This is using another method called, I've just got to check the notes here. Okay. So image adjustments, and you want match color. I don't often use this. And the source for this one is called Forest Blur. And the layer is layer, oh, hang on a minute, I know what I've got to do first. Go back to layers. There. Click on the background layer. Image. Adjustments. Match color. There. Forest Blur is the source. Layer 1 is the layer that I'm using for the color. OK it, and suddenly the forest burst into flame. And this flame is now a little intense, so I'd get the eraser and maybe give it an opacity that's quite low, and perhaps a soft edge brush. So to change the brush size, I'm using the two bracket keys to the right of the letter P, and if you hold down Shift and tap on the left bracket key, now it's soft. If I hold down Shift and tap on the right bracket key, 4 hits, now it's hard. So that's how you change the brush size. And just dust it over this. And I'm in the wrong layer, aren't I? So history, let's get rid of that. Go back to layers again. That layer, and just work on the flame a little bit. Soften it up a bit. Okay. Now we have to add this guy. Image calculations. Now, like I said, this one's easy. There are no other layers to work with. I've got 3 channels, red, green, and blue. There's a lot of green in this image. I don't really want to use the green channel because it might show up too strong. I'm going to use red and blue. I don't want a blending mode just yet. Well, I don't want screen, that's for sure. It's too light. Let's try the opposite, multiply. You see how this works? Totally different. If I want to isolate the dog, which I called a Scotty, but I'm reliably informed is actually called a Westie. I need a lighter dog. The background's great, but I want the dog to be a bit lighter. So let's have a look. How about color dodge? Well, that's a lighter dog, but I've got a lot more work to do in the background. Linear light. Pretty good. Not much work to do in the background, not too much work to do in the foreground. And in fact, between vivid light and linear light, there's not a great deal to pick between them. On vivid light, the dog is slightly lower contrast. It probably doesn't matter very much which I choose. Now, if I OK that, then what I've got to do is blacken up these areas in the background. So I can use the brush to do that, and paint in black on it, and just get rid of those areas. Doesn't take long. And then I'll switch to the white brush, and if you want to switch between your foreground and your background colors quickly and easily, you just press the letter X on the keyboard, and that switches them around. So now I've got white selected, and I'm going to paint out his nose. This is not supposed to be black. If we leave that black, there'll be a hole in his head. So we paint that out. Oops. That was tricky. I think I went over the edge there, so I'm playing safe. And I'm not going right up to the edge, because that I can deal with the dodge and burn features. That's pretty good. Now switch to the dodge tool. It's set on shadows. Let's switch to highlights. Good idea to do them first. Work on these light gray areas, and they turn to white. And those bits too. Now, I don't want this hair to be too fat, so I want to thin the hair down a bit, so I'm going to switch to shadows now. Hold down the Alt key, and go around here, because otherwise we're going to have all these green highlights coming in from the grass that he's standing on. Okay, that should do it. Now in channels, we go back to the RGB channel. Command click on the alpha channel that we just created. Go back to layers again. If you don't go back to the channel, you're going to be selecting that, and you'll get a white silhouette of a dog in your image, which you don't want. So you go back to the RGB image. Command C. Go to the image that you wanted. Command V. OK. There he is. Put him behind the woman and just drag him out to the side. And there's calculations. Any questions? Yeah, hundreds, but I can't think of how to say them yet. Anyway, like I said, we're taping these, so you do get the tapes to download, and that's almost perfect timing, even without Mark coming in to screw it up. So, anyway, thank you very much for coming.
Question for you.
Yeah.
I've recently got one of these.
Yeah.
I'm still learning it.
Yep.
And when I make selections, something happens. When it thinks I've finished the selection.
Oh yeah.
What is it I'm doing wrong?
Are you using?
So frustrated.
I go
back to the mouse in the end. I get fed up.
Are you using a PC or a Mac?
I'm a PC man.
Me too, actually. If you go into the control panel, you'll find you've got a utility there called Wacom or Bamboo, whatever you've got.
Yeah, I've got Bamboo.
Okay, so if you open that up, you can find that you can change the sensitivity of the nib, and that's the key. It's too sensitive.
Yeah,
and you can dumb it
I keep
down.
thinking, what am I doing wrong? And I've tried going
That's all it is. It just thinks, because it's pressure sensitive,
Exactly, yeah.
it's thinking, oh, the pressure's off,
Exactly.
he must have
be
finished.
finished, yeah.
That's it. So whack up the intensity. Yeah. And don't go back to a mouse.
No, I really try not to. Because I've only got a little one like that.
Yeah, they're great. That's all I use. I use it on the train, I lean back in an armchair. They're great, they're wonderful.
Yeah, really
And I don't own shares. Yet.
Sorry?
I don't own shares.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Hello, I am really getting a Wacom.
Yeah.
Obviously, they come in all sorts of different sizes. As different sizes easier to use, is the larger is the more control you have. Generally speaking.
I don't find it that way
No?
because you can zoom in. And so I don't actually find that's a problem. But if you've got a large one, your screen is that big on your tablet, and to get from A to B, you've got to do a much bigger movement. Now, my brother-in-law is an illustrator, and he's got a whopping great big tablet because he likes that. Me, I just want to rest my hand on something and, like I'm writing. So maybe it's I'm lazy. Also, if you saw my desk, you'd know that I didn't have much more space, So this A6 just is perfect. I've always just used A6, and I've tried other sizes, but they're much more expensive too. The
Yeah.
bigger ones, yes.
Okay.
So, good.
When you did your merge, I've done a couple of photo merges.
Yeah.
They always end up looking. They always end up sort of looking like that. Is there why you
Flatten it out. I mean, all I'd say is just try different ways of tying them together. Cylindrical gives you the least cropping, but the most distortion.
I guess if you're standing in one place with a camera, by virtue of the fact you're doing it, the only way to do it really is
If you do that,
yeah.
you'll have a lot more distortion than if you do that.
Oh, okay.
So rather than go click and then turn your whole body, just It's as if the camera's on a central pivot.
I've got you.
Doing like that, then they'll have a much better. Hi.
I